Natraj is the host of Startup Project podcast. He is an investor at Incisive VC, an angel investor, and a product manager. All opinions expressed by Natraj and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of the firms they work with. This podcast is informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Natraj and guests may maintain positions in the companies or securities discussed on this podcast. To learn more, visit thestartupproject.io.
Hey, Prakash. Thanks for coming onto the show.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So in Startup Project, I like to feature, interesting products, that are solving interesting problems. And as I explored Xano more and more, it is at the intersection of a couple of very interesting trends in terms of how we are developing and scaling applications in general. So I thought it would be really useful for our audience to have this conversation about, what Xano is doing and what you're building at Xano. But before we get into that, can you give a little bit introduction about yourself and your career till now before starting Xano?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, pretty much outside of school or after I graduated college, I went to Cal Poly Pomona. That's the Cal Poly that most people don't know about. I actually joined a small startup called Picasa, and Google actually ended up buying Picasa, and it became Google Photos. So a lot of my coworkers back then called me very lucky because I had no idea. I just joined and then that happened. And I spent the next 8.5 years at Google. I had the privilege of, leading the design on Google Calendar for a bit. I led the design and research team for Google Enterprise, which was G Suite and Google Workspace. So I really just had an amazing career there, learning a lot, working with brilliant people. After Google, I left and I went into the startup world. After a short break, I basically did a startup, and I call it 3.5 years of me getting the crap kicked out of myself. And then I went into consulting, as one does after a failed startup. I consulted for a couple of years before starting Xano. So that's kind of been the trajectory of the career. By the way, at Google, I was like UX. I kind of evolved from a UX person to a product person. And then obviously after doing a startup, you're just kind of like more horizontal across the business.
Yeah, I think especially, I have this thesis about software products, like cracking the right software product is about, finding the right abstraction layer at which people want to work at. And I think exploring Xano and where it works, I think your background sort of makes sense. And someone like you will be starting Xano actually makes sense. I think someone should have an eye on at what level this product should be actually designed.
Yeah, I think that's a keen observation.
Explain what Xano is.
Yeah, so that's first of all, that's a really good observation because I think one of the main pains that I felt when I was doing my startup was my lack of control as a design product person over the engineering process. You have to pay for an expensive engineer. They're kind of like a car mechanic. If they tell you something is going to take, a month to make and tens of thousands of dollars, you just kind of have to believe them and hope that it works out. So I always knew that was a painful process. And then I came to learn that, 80% of the time and resource in software development is spent on the backend side of software creation. And so Xano, what we are as a tool, we're a scalable no-code backend. And for those of you that don't know the no-code space, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's helping people create software without having to know how to code. No code has been around for a very long time, right? They're like a tool like Squarespace is even considered no code, but just as a website builder. It's gone through a couple different iterations and generations. We're part of a new part of no code where you can really do anything. You can build anything. You can scale without limits. And we 100% focus on the backend, which is the server, the database, the API layer, and we connect to any front end that you want.
So what kind of applications does Xano enable to build?
So Xano is really actually meant to be a visual programming language. It's Turing complete. Anything you can articulate in a software application or a software programming language, you can do in Xano without code. So in terms of the types of applications that we see built, I mean, we see everything from a dog walking application all the way up to like a customer advocacy platform, like at a big company like Qualtrics. So, it's really just, it's kind of like asking, what you can build with JavaScript, right? It's like the use cases are endless. And in that same way, we see our customers building many types of things on Xano.
One of the problems or one of the assumptions people often have when they listen to, when we categorize a product as no code is that, hey, this might be good for experimentation, but can I run my production applications on this? Can I really go from a demo or a hobby project to actually running something that actually makes money, or I can build my own company on top of it? Like, right, that is actually where you can sort of separate out, like, players which are, created sustainable companies and will continue to be, sustainable companies versus, platforms which sort of didn't break out. How do you see Xano, and where does it fit in that sense?
Yeah, I always say that no code, low code has some baggage associated with it. And that is because the no code vendors and tools of the past have had all of these limitations, right? And they are generally limitations around scalability, security, reliability, compliance. Those are the major categories. And so I think that the hesitation is that no code really is something that you should just prototype and tinker with, and not anything to take seriously at scale. But as I mentioned earlier, these next generation tools are architected fundamentally differently. So, for example, us as a no-code backend, we are architected fundamentally different than some of our predecessors that might look like a spreadsheet on steroids, and then scalability and compliance and security things are layered in as an afterthought. We were architected from the very beginning, right, to be enterprise grade, to where it was portable. You can move it to your own infrastructure, control the resources yourself. And then that nuance in terms of the flexibility, in terms of what you can build, was also addressed very, very early on. And so I think that the concern is definitely valid, but one of the things that we hope to do as a vendor in this community is to, kind of break that stereotype and show that you can start with no-code, low-code tools like Xano and scale without limits.
So, I mean, to me, while I was exploring Xano, it almost felt like, I sort of like almost like, because I was a backend and a front end engineer, and I've like played around with different stacks of building backend. And one of the problems I see is like building a small application is getting really complicated. Even if, even for developers who are seasoned, because things are so rapidly changing and it's becoming more and more complex, even to get started and, add things. On one side, you feel like everything is getting simpler, but when you start to write an application that is full stack, you have so many things to take care of to even write a smaller application. I feel like over my career, I've seen that in the name of distributed systems and in the name of like scaling to hundreds of million users, we've made this incredibly complicated backend stack to actually get started. What is your thought process on this? Am I just a bad developer who's experiencing this, or is this something really happening?
No, not at all. I think you call out something that's pretty important. I think as we've introduced new technologies to handle different use cases, certainly like on the DevOps side of things or site reliability side of things, it just gives the consumer more choices, which then leads to confusion around what to start with, especially if you have sustainability in mind when you're building an application. Really, when you're building any sort of software that's meant to be a business, the most important thing is validating it in the market, right? So you want to get it out the door. And we believe that the vendors should be responsible for making a good decision, a long-term decision in terms of an infrastructure and the DevOps and all of that piece, so you can focus on the business logic and your relationship with your customers in validating it. The more quickly you can do that, the better it's going to be. You're either going to fail and learn and then iterate, or you're going to get it right and you're going to be able to scale your business on something that you can trust. And so I think there's just a lot of decisions to be made when you're building software. And I think that people like to overcomplicate, or it can be overcomplicated if you really want it to. But I think a general rule of thumb that we pretty much tell everyone is you're always going to rebuild. Once you're starting, you're just get used to the fact that no matter what stack you build on, you're going to rebuild it at some point. So the stack that you can use where you can iterate the quickest is probably going to be the best one. And we wanted to basically really have that true to our spirit in terms of the way we engineered Xano, but on a trusted infrastructure to where if they did hit it and if they did start seeing that usage and product market fit, they could rely on it to scale with them.
I mean, whenever I talk to like very early stage founders or founders who've sort of had some sort of product market fit, what they start out in general and where they end up is slightly different. Talk to me a little bit of, how did the process of finding the product market fit, assuming that you found it, sort of looked like for Xano in last 5 years?
So I think like the way that we went about creating Xano is we generally knew that this no-code, low-code space was growing. More and more people were turning to no-code, low-code despite the perception of its limitation, because there just frankly is more demand than there are engineers, whether it be in a big company or in the world of software that needs to be created. So we saw this, but we saw this limitation in terms of the backend, right? And building sustainably with security and that scalability in mind. So we kind of made two decisions. One is we decided to 100% focus just on the backend, right? And not do the full stack. This was the non-obvious thing, number one, that everyone was like, that's probably not a good idea. The second piece is we decided not to abstract away the core principles and concepts of what the software development language should be. So for example, we chose to call it an API instead of like a workflow or a Zapier type thing, right? Or a Zap. We chose to call it a webhook, right? Like we believe you should teach the next generation of software developers that have the eagerness to learn by just abstracting away the code, but just making those concepts more accessible, right? So those two decisions were non-obvious, and getting product market fit around that was first just started with a landing page as we were building the project. Like, hey, this is like a no-code backend. If you're interested in something like this, sign up for early access. And if you do an interview with me, you'll get in sooner, right? That's where it starts. And then once you start like having people use the product, you kind of see how quickly or at least we saw how quickly they came to start relying on it. Then the next step is, will they pay for it? And then over time, you just see how that word of mouth grows and how sticky it became. So I think for us, we got lucky in the sense that we kind of had this non-obvious approach. And despite what people were telling us, we thought that it was like kind of a need in the market, probably because we've had a lot of failure in our past on things that didn't work. And then we were able to kind of see some of that traction and usage. And, even if we have some product market fit, it's always the strength of the product market fit. And product market fit changes as your company shifts and starts to grow, right? So anyways, that's probably the story of how we thought about it and how we got the modicum of success that we do have.
So, I mean, because, backend has so many components, right? Like, was there a specific customer use case that said, okay, which you cracked and when you got confidence that, okay, we've really found something here? Like, was there a specific example of a customer or a use case where you realized, oh, okay, I think we are in the right direction?
It wasn't a specific customer or use case, but Xano was actually born out of an agency, a development agency. It started as a command line tool to basically just make backend creation easier without having to grow the team. So when you see hundreds of different use cases, you kind of realize most software is the same, right? They have the same kind of infrastructure setup, same database. Like there's the same motions that you're doing over and over. To your point, that's hard for a lot of people to like think about doing, but after a while, it becomes pretty repetitive. I think for us, it was less about the specific use case and more about that procedure and those steps that you had to go through, even just to start validating and testing your idea, right? And sure, you could do this on some of the other tools that were in the market, but then you couldn't rely on it once you started to have that modicum of product market fit and usage and scale, or if security was a prerequisite for you to even build. So that was the approach that we took, and we found that being pretty horizontal, at least for us, has worked so far.
Oh, so you mentioned that it came out of a studio. Is it from your consulting, or were your co-founders running a studio, which sort of gave this insight?
My co-founders were running the development agency. I had done some consulting work as an individual for that agency, and it was in that doing some of that work, the joint client work, where I had seen the evolution of Xano from the very beginning as a command line tool to a decade later, having served so many, hundreds of use cases. And, I told my two co-founders at the time, I was like, if we took this and we productized this, I think we could serve a pretty big need in the market, and I think we might have something special. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, when you said that example of seeing hundreds of examples of how to scale backend, I had this idea of we've evolved products, or like the way we develop applications based on cloud, right? Everyone uses cloud to abstract away things, and we are moving higher in that abstraction level. So we had infrastructure as a service, then platform as a service, and now probably with AI, like intelligence as a service, right? We are sort of abstracting the layer away. And I was thinking, at some point, someone has to abstract away, like, why does everyone has to do a scalable website? At some point, we have to abstract away that, hey, I want a scalable retail website like Amazon.com, and that has to be abstracted away at some point. Mm-hmm. And you can say that Shopify is a little bit of that, but it's not truly scalable, right? As a merchant, I don't have full control. Like, I don't control backend, I don't control front end. I just can control pieces of it on the UI. So I was at some point thinking that at some point there will be a company which will give me an Amazon.com, and I'll scale linearly whenever my usage grows. I can have the option of, scaling up my database, scaling down my database, and I can configure how I want to scale, which geographies I want to be like. So everything a well understood engineer will not be coding it, but just deciding it, right? So you are sort of like an evolution of abstracting away that complexity from backend perspective.
100%. And I actually think that we actually could serve that use case pretty well, in the sense that, I think a lot of companies and vendors in the no-code space, they're very good at building blocks, right? Like these connectors that connect one service to the other, where we kind of took the other approach and built the engine and the foundation, this visual development layer that is on top of an engine that abstracts away the DevOps component, the infrastructure, Kubernetes, Docker, Postgres. Like, you don't have to worry about those things. Those are there, and they're orchestrated in such a way to where as you scale, you don't have to worry about it. So if you're building, for example, if someone wants to build, which you can do in Xano today, an Amazon.com template, right, with the right database schema, and you want to be in multiple geographic regions, well, you can start with that business logic layer in the database. And then from the infra side, we're able to deploy in whatever region you want or in multiple regions. And so I think it's really just building the foundation that people all align and agree, like this is the right layer of abstraction in terms of the business logic and the back end. And then from the infra side, they're able to move it as they start to grow that linear growth that you were talking about.
So not to use no code or low code, but who's the ideal user today for Xano? I mean, there is like the hobbyist developer, there is then the pro developer, there is just an experimentation user. So who's the main user today of Xano?
Yeah, so we service primarily the citizen developer. And if you haven't heard of that persona before, it's a Gartner-defined persona. You can think of them as a product owner type. They're a systems thinker. They don't know how to code, but they need to build software leveraging, tools like the no-code and low-code industry has. There are also developers that are on Xano as well, but primarily we serve the citizen developer. Now, the citizen developer, there's a wide spectrum of experience, right? People that are more on the citizen side will use tools like Airtable, Google Sheets, because it's very easy to pick up and start using. That serves certain use cases, simple use cases, very well. We serve an advanced citizen developer where they need to graduate out of tools like an Airtable or a Google Sheet when their needs are those that require this scalability, security, reliability. That's who we serve. So an advanced citizen developer who is who Xano serves today, and we're constantly working to make ourselves more accessible to the more citizen side of the citizen developer.
So let's slightly shift gears and talk about like how you're doing in terms of as a company. Like I think you raised your Series A, and you have a split between I think enterprise and consumer. Like what is your revenue split? How you're doing enterprise versus maybe SMB or citizen developer. Like give me a picture of how you're doing on that side.
Yeah, so we launched in January of 2021, so just a couple of years ago. And since then, we've luckily seen some pretty exponential growth, largely due to word of mouth, right? We are just a backend, so we're front-end agnostic, and all the different front-end forums, whether it be a JavaScript forum or a no-code front-end forum, were mentioned. And so I think we can attribute our growth to that. We have today over 70,000 backends that we've deployed. And like you said, we've raised our Series A. And in terms of the enterprise versus the self-serve split, it's about 20% enterprise revenue, a little more than that. And then the 80% is that self-serve. We're obviously working right now to develop our muscle in the enterprise, that go-to-market sales assist or PLG sales assist motion. But for right now, I think we are mostly known in kind of small, medium-sized business. And then in the enterprise, I think no-code is still very early in the adoption, and we're trying to prove ourselves there right now.
How is the ecosystem or like the competition in the space that you are operating? And I'm not talking about like low code or no code per se, but like in specifically like at the abstraction layer that you are operating at, primarily focused on backend. Like who's your primary competition if there is one?
Yeah, so I would say that there's a spectrum between citizen and developer, and then there's a spectrum between developer to engineer. Like, junior developers, I think you said a hobbyist developer, is very different than an architect, right? So we service kind of that upper end of the citizen developer into kind of the midway to becoming an engineer. And in that space, there are a number of different tools. When you think about backend specifically, if I'm going to pick like the number one competitor, I think we serve different markets, but we definitely see them, is Supabase, right? And Supabase is basically like Postgres in the cloud. They've done an amazing job. Great founders, they execute very well. But I think that there are tools that believe that making a developer's life easier is kind of the future. And then there are tools like us that believe that the next generation of software creators are going to look more like citizen developers. So we serve these two markets, but because we serve the upper end, we tend to see each other there.
Got it. You mentioned in one of the answers, you almost thought of Xano as a design language, and that gave me a thought that I think it is also for AI to use this design language and make things happen on Xano. Like, are you guys thinking about AI? Like, what is your take on how AI will impact your product trajectory or use cases, or how are you thinking about AI intersecting with Xano?
Yeah, so I mentioned visual development because we are very much, even though, we use all core foundational software engineering principles. So variables, loops, conditionals, things that every programmer knows and is used to and is kind of language agnostic, right? And we visualize that. When it comes to AI obviously understands these concepts as you train the model, and it obviously is trained on different languages. And AI has been such a beautiful thing because I think it has opened up so much more opportunity and has built so much awareness around creating software and making creating software so much more accessible, right? Some people just ask AI to generate simple applications for them. They'll copy and paste the code. And if they have the technical competence, they will deploy it on their own. So I love AI for that reason. That being said, I think that something else is needed after, or to pick up where AI leaves off. So what do I mean by this? If I say that I want to build, for example, an Uber type application, and you give the same prompt, right? Number one, we're probably going to receive two different code sets, right? That's the first thing. But even if we don't, let's say we receive the exact same thing. What I mean in my mind with an Uber application, with wait times, vehicle types, etc., is very different than what you mean. So in that case, if we mean different things, well, what are we going to do? We're going to keep reprompting until it keeps spitting out obfuscated code that we may or may not know how to read. What's better is you need to pick up from that scaffolding and take a visual canvas where you can infuse your intention into. So we believe Xano will be the visual canvas that can pick up where AI leaves off, right? And so I think it's not, I think a lot of people make the mistake of saying AI is going to replace coders or replace no code. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think they're going to work very well together. And we believe that we can pick up where AI does 50 to 60% of the work for you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, even when you use ChatGPT or any of those tools to even rewrite or write something, you often sort of take what you get and sort of modify it slightly because it's not still there in terms of what you want. And we see, at least I see it almost every day, that what you ask and what you expect is not yet there. So you still have to, so you get up to almost maybe 60, 70% of what you want, but then you have to still modify and add your own flavor and correct it or reword it a little bit.
And it's going to take,
you're right on that point.
Yeah. And I also think that it's going to take a while for it to get there wherever there is, because even I always joke, sometimes, for example, if I message my own wife and I forget to put an exclamation point or an emoji, she misunderstands maybe that I'm in some sort of mood, and then maybe that's like a fight for later. And I'm like, hey, I didn't actually mean that. So the point is, we as humans even miscommunicate with each other. So then to think that an AI can build an application that just understands all of the nuances of what you mean, it's going to take a very, very long time to personalize that for each individual, and rather than to assume a model can get everything for every single person correct. So it's very important to obviously leverage the power of AI, but to then use tools that can kind of, like I mentioned, make those edits. Like right now, you know how to program, so you can make those edits yourself and you can make those corrections, but a lot of people can't do that. So we have to figure out a way to extend the power of AI and pick up where it left off.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Um, so one of the things that I'm trying to sort of add in all our conversations is the aspect of acquiring new customers, especially at the early stage. So I'm curious, like at Xano, whether from the start or whether now after 5 years or 4 years into this, what are some of the techniques that you guys use to acquire new customers?
I think that one thing that we've done very well, especially as a development tool, is to create lots of valuable YouTube content. If you go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/nocodebackend, you will see that we have videos starting from like, how is software made? What is a backend? What is a front end? How does an API work? All the way to how do you merge two JSON arrays? I think it is very important to do this and to continually put out content, because this is how people consume content these days. And while it feels like non-obvious for a development tool to be consumed in this way, it's probably our largest source of high quality traffic, right? And it's the beautiful thing about the content is it keeps giving. Like, some of this content is just evergreen. And so I think that we have done a really good job at, from the very beginning, creating content and having every opportunity to create content be in our DNA. We also started running office hours, which was pretty unique at the time when we started. Every user, even a non-paid user, has the opportunity every single week to come and meet with the team and get their questions answered. And guess what? If they ask something that we think is unique and we think can help other people, we clip that, right? And we put that on YouTube to then be discovered. I think the final thing as a development tool is having a community tool that can be indexed, right, on the questions that are answered and searched for in the future. Because the chances are the problems that your customers are having today is a problem that a customer is going to have 3 months from now, right? So I think it's a mistake right now, until they fix this, to have a community, for example, on like a Discord or a Slack. While, like, even though that immediate communication might feel really good, well, guess what happens? Like, hundreds of questions could be answered, and then all of that knowledge evaporates and dissipates, right? So I think it's really important for customer acquisition, natural customer acquisition, to have that live on, right? And so I think those are some of the decisions that we've made that I'm very happy with and that keep paying dividends today.
Yeah, I mean, the point about YouTube is very right. YouTube, I think a lot of people don't realize, is the second largest search engine. So if they're searching on Google, they're probably also searching on YouTube for the same thing. And I think it's interesting to know the part about community. I'm wondering, do you have any plans of, because I've seen this in sort of other tools which sort of became ecosystems of their own, where you have marketplaces of people who can sort of develop things. Like, I think we see this in WordPress and Shopify. Are you seeing a marketplace sort of a thing evolving in Xano?
Absolutely. Yeah, we already have a marketplace of developers, agencies, and coaches. And then we're currently working on a marketplace where people will be able to release capability and soon be able to sell capability, all using the Xano platform. I think the ecosystem and this marketplace partner ecosystem is extraordinarily important. And it is something that we have active work streams on. We're even working on a certification process, because we've heard feedback from our agency partners that say, hey, look, I need to separate myself from everyone else that says that they build on Xano. How can I prove that I am, an expert Xano builder, an expert Xano architect? And so we have certification programs that we're actively working on as well.
I mean, after talking to you, and I've seen those YouTube videos, by the way, because I wanted to understand the product, and it looks like you should almost rebrand yourself to calling as a backend cloud instead of in no code backend, because I think it feels a lot like some of the cloud products essentially. So yeah, I think that would be interesting marketing stunt. You should try out cloud and see how it goes. but we're almost at the end of our conversation. So I want to ask a couple of questions that I ask all my guests. So the first one is, what are you consuming right now? So like what's influencing your thinking? It can be books, movies, Netflix, whatever.
I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm sure a lot of your guests do. But I subscribe to podcasts like, the All In podcast, Revenue Builders, the Logan Bartlett, Invest Like the Best with Patrick O'Shaughnessy. And I learn something every single week. I'm constant, like some people will work out to music. When I do work out, I'm working out to podcasts. I'm listening to podcasts on my commute. I'm one of those types that kind of listen at 2x and skip around. Because I think I'm at the point where I kind of know maybe the nuggets of wisdom I'm looking for. But I'm just so grateful for the community of podcasters that have amazing guests, right? That I can learn from about management style, about growing a business, customer acquisition, go to market. So I would say that that's where I get all of my knowledge from.
Who are your mentors that helped your career?
Well, related to the podcast stuff, I think that there are moments or nuggets of wisdom that you pull out from all of these podcasts, from all of these different individuals that influence you. And, one, I would say two people that I've never met, but that have really influenced my way of thinking are Chamath Palihapitiya. And I think he has like a wonderful framework of just intellectual honesty, and just, always seeking the truth in what you're doing. Certainly David Ticharya, who is MongoDB, great management and philosophy around, philosophy around management and growing a company. And then in terms of like in-person people, I used to work with Adrian Graham and Carl Shogreen. They were at Google with me. They ended up having a Facebook career. They sold their company to Facebook, and then they ended up creating Seesaw and working with them directly. They're just, brilliant individuals. They work really hard. They always have this like healthy dose of like skeptical optimism that I think has just taught me. I've like learned from them to basically, build in a very measured way where you have your head in the clouds, but your feet on the ground.
One final question. What do you know about being a founder that you wish you know before starting Xano?
I think I'm very happy with all of the mistakes that I've made. Obviously, it's shaped kind of all the decisions and where we are today. But I think if there was one thing, and I've said this on a couple different interviews, but it's that the things that matter take time. I think when we're younger, we're always in a hurry. We always think that there might be a silver bullet shortcut, and we're always looking for it. But when you're trying to do something that is impactful and is going to have long-lasting impact, there's no shortcut. It just takes day in, day out, work, trying, learning. And it's important to align yourself with, I think, your zone of excellence and what gets you excited, because it's going to be a very long journey. And in this case, Xano is it for me. I really feel like I'm doing what I meant to do. But I think when I was younger, especially before my first startup, I didn't really have that mindset or mentality.
Amazing. I think that's a good note to stop the podcast and end the conversation. Again, thanks for coming on the show, Prakash. Really looking forward to what Xano will do in the future.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.